Greetings. Welcome to ITR Live. I'm your host, Chris Hagan, and we are back here in studio for another fun-filled, action-packed episode of the Gold Standard and Iowa Conservative podcast. We have Alan Ostergren, who's already bumping along with the audio track, in studio today from the Kirkwood Institute. Welcome, Alan.
Thanks, Chris. I feel privileged to be able to sit in John Hendrickson's chair.
I know. We don't have John. John's out of the office. Actually, right now as we speak, John is back in his native land of Minnesota.
Oh my gosh.
Anyway, hopefully he'll be back soon.
It's probably the end of ice fishing season.
Yeah.
It's probably, a rite of passage up in Minnesota, drag the ice houses off the lake. And
well, they're having a snowstorm coming in, apparently, so he's worried about
he's going to be tickle pink.
Yeah, he hates driving. He complains about winter weather driving. It's endearing, but I'm like, John, you're from the Iron Range of Minnesota and you drive an F-150. You ought to be able to handle this.
Right. It's not the Arctic Circle, but you can see it from there.
Right, exactly. So,
yeah. I feel privileged to be here.
Good.
And I will say, Chris, at some point I want to do a podcast with John. I've never had a chance to do an episode with John. I want us to just completely nerd out.
Yeah.
You will have the lowest sustained listenership of any podcast episode ever, probably, because we're going to nerd out on the American political system and all those things. But
he's your guy. He has many thoughts.
Yes.
So, do you have a closet political philosophy that you don't share with most people that we could draw out of you, or?
No, I wear it all on my sleeve.
Oh, okay.
I am at the point in my life where, damn the torpedoes, full speed ahead. I want to be in the front row, right into the breach. Let's do this. Well,
for those of you that are not listen to every episode and haven't been here a long time, Alan is a friend of the organization, Kirkwood Institute, sort of allied endeavor in the greater conservative ecosystem. And we were discussing this in a brief pre-production meeting. Are you a prominent Iowa conservative attorney or the prominent Iowa conservative attorney?
Well, according to the Twitter,
okay,
as my dad would say, I'm the leading. I don't know if I deserve to be the singular at the top. I like to think I'm in the top half of conservative lawyers out there.
You're definitely in the top half of conservative lawyers at this table.
Okay.
I will give you that.
I appreciate that. I appreciate it. I will take it.
Okay, good.
I will take it.
Okay, well, good. Well, when we've had you on in the past, Alan, that we talk a lot about, nerdy lawyer stuff. So in an effort to keep people with us for at least more than 3 minutes of the episode, we're just going to talk about some fun, kind of broader political election stuff. So I know, remind folks, you've done a lot of work, and I'm not necessarily to go into it, but to set the stage of your role in Iowa politics. You've done a lot of work with campaigns and elections, and specifically recounts and election integrity. Can you just frame up your role in this whole thing
sure.
before we get started?
Sure, yeah, and I want to say, just for the record, so to speak, that work I do as a private lawyer, Alan,
yes.
our Ostergren PC, not because Kirkwood Institute's a C3, but when I left being Muscatine County Attorney in May of 2020, I was very fortunate to get involved in some election litigation in the 2020 cycle. We, Republican campaign groups, we intervened first in a lawsuit over absentee ballot rules, and then we sued 3 county auditors who were flouting Iowa election law, sending out what were called pre-populated absentee ballot request forms, where you get the form in the mail, and literally if you just made a crayon mark on the signature line and sent it back, a ballot would be sent out. That was illegal. We sued. And it's one of the few places during the 2020 cycle that Republican campaign groups actually won election litigation. I'm very proud of that. And then that election happened, and then I thought I was done with the campaign election law for a little while. And then 2 days after the election, I was called by some good friends on the Marionette Miller Meeks campaign. She had unofficially won election night by about 280 votes. And then as election results were being updated by county auditors, all of a sudden that lead disappeared. And that launched me into leading the effort on her legal team for the recount. She ultimately was the state certified winner by 6 votes in that race, and I'm told that's the closest congressional race ever. And then that turned into also defending that victory in a contest of that election before the House of Representatives.
Yep.
So I've done some other election law things. I just finished up representing a school board member, actually in Pleasant Valley, who faced an effort to overturn the results of that election by the losing side in that race. And I've been fortunate now to be in my 3rd cycle doing election law. Election law is something that you do a lot more in even-numbered years, and so I've had to find other things to occupy myself and pay the bills in the odd-numbered years. But it's been a very rewarding part of my law practice.
Yeah. Well, speaking of the Marionette Miller Meeks campaign and Iowa's congressional campaigns, there's my segue. So today, I mean, I guess kind of the first thing I want to hit on in this political environment is the Des Moines Register today released yet another article, yet another piece of the Iowa poll, which had the generic congressional ballot. I think they've been trickling these questions from their last poll out for about the last month now.
Well, they have. They have. I see it on I have my phone with the article pulled up. The Iowa poll of 640 likely voters, February 25th through 28th.
Yeah, that's almost a full month old now. Yeah.
I remember, if you spell the word news, the first 3 letters are the word new.
Yeah.
Right? So they've been dribbling this out for a little bit longer than they normally would.
As opposed to the ITR Foundation poll, we get numbers, we give them to you, and I want to put those together. But it is interesting that I think they were in the field about 2 weeks after our last ITR Foundation poll. But really, I think a shock number to me that they sort of buried in the article is just the overall generic congressional ballot in Iowa, which was plus 17. Now, that is a huge number. So if you're not familiar with this, they sort of ask, okay, forget the names, forget whether it's Ashley Hinson or Marionette Miller Meeks or Zach Nunn or Andy Feenstra. Are you planning to vote Republican or Democrat this fall? And that, so we kind of call that the generic ballot. Plus 17. I mean, seems to me there's going to be a lot of Republicans win a lot of campaigns this fall in a plus 17 environment.
That's an extraordinarily large number, if that holds true to November, because broadly speaking, and we can make this really wonky on American political science, and
we tried to tease us out that we weren't going to do that. So.
But I would say a good rule of thumb is if you look at how people actually vote and everything else that goes into it, if that generic ballot number is Democrat, say plus 3 or 4, that would normally be a really good environment for Republicans. They're normally going to win lots of races just because of the prevalence of independent voters who actually show up. I mean, the difference between intensity of desire to show up and vote at the election versus what you're going to say to a pollster. So it's a good environment, D plus 3 for Republicans.
Yes.
To say R plus 17 is extraordinary. I mean, brace for impact if you're on the other team. And I think it reflects the fact that the national economy has been so marked by high inflation, out of control spending. Immigration is an issue that is, I think, particularly strong among independent voters. And just the sense of malaise that you get when you watch the news, when you see what's going on, that voters, I think, are going to respond to that very strongly. Donald Trump is polling well ahead in Iowa. I think whether you call that coattails or not, I mean, that's a super wonky debate.
Right.
But I think it reflects a national environment that Iowa voters are responding to. I would tell all my friends who are Republican candidates and campaign workers and operatives, run through the tape. Don't take anything for granted. Go chase every vote you can get. But this is an environment where, as big as the margins were in Iowa after the 22 cycle, we could see something even bigger than that.
Yeah, we do a lot of our work at the state legislative level. And it's interesting this year, we don't have statewide on the ballot. We don't have, governor, AG, down ballot races. We don't have a U.S. Senate race on the ballot. So you have those congressional races, but then we're president, Congress, and we're just down to the legislative races on the ballot. Your state senator, in some areas, your state representative is going to be the third line on the ballot. In some places, it falls. So I say that by way that's going to get a lot of attention in Iowa this year. And you're exactly right. I think thinking back to some of my time running Iowa House races, well, both my own and being part of others, even an even, Republican versus Democrat generic ballot generally would mean Republican majorities in the legislature. And right now we're at almost historic highs, at least in our lifetimes, of Republican control. It's 34 in the Senate, 64 in the House. And those were won in a Republican plus 12 environment.
Yeah.
So you take that out. If this really is, the ITR Foundation poll we had it at plus 15. The Register has a plus 17. They would tell you that they're better than us. So for the sake of argument, we'll go with plus 17. That would, Lynn, do you think that maybe they can even grow their majorities?
I think it's very possible, and you're right to qualify it as biggest in our lifetimes. I go back to, I think it's the 40th General Assembly. The Iowa Senate was 49 Republicans and 1 Democrat, and I still, I want to put John Hendrickson to work on. I want to know more about that one guy, hey, congratulations, you just won your minority leader election.
Yeah.
You're the ranking member on every committee.
I was having this conversation last night with some national folks that I think that's the way it is in Hawaii right now. I believe there is 1, maybe 2 Republicans in the Hawaii Senate.
Wow.
And so they kind of flip a coin of who goes to the national conference to represent them,
Yeah.
Or otherwise they have their caucus in a phone booth somewhere.
Yeah.
But one historical note, that goes back to a time in Iowa when you had 1 senator for every 2 counties.
Right.
And so then the shift, I believe, was late 60s, where you then went to a population-driven breakdown of where the Senate districts are at. So in modern times, we're sort of at high water marks. But we'll get John on that. I think he'd like to. I
think that'd be a good project. But I mean, the broader point is, I do think it is very possible that you could have, and especially if you look at the current General Assembly, the makeup of the 90th, 64 Republican House members, 34 Republican Senate members. But really, there was 1 Republican House seat, Lena Stoltenberg, in the Quad Cities, who won by a very small margin.
Yeah. In a Biden, well, it wouldn't be a Biden seat, but a seat that I think the governor lost or was very close on or something. I mean, really an anomaly.
And she's not running again. That'll be a hard seat to hold. But there were 3 or 4 other seats that Republicans narrowly lost. I mean, there was a seat in Council Bluffs. I think there was about 10, 15 votes roughly. There was one in Lynn County that was maybe a few hundred. Yeah. So it doesn't take much, and you can pick up 3 or 4 more seats easily in that kind of environment.
I think the interesting thing for me is thinking back to some of those cycles where I was involved in the broader effort. Is you start in that was Iowa's maybe a little bit more purple then, going back to maybe 14, 16, 18, that you wanted to win a majority. That was the goal. If you were running that operation, the House Majority Fund, we need 51 Republicans. And then that carries forward as you govern in the session. It's like, well, we need to make sure we hold our majority. We need to make sure we do the things that will, and it causes you to, your perspective on the issues you run and how you navigate that. And then I think we've arrived after 20 and 22 where, you know what, we're going to hold these majorities. Iowa is sufficiently red now. This realignment in American politics has led us to a point where Iowa, we have a pretty fair amount of confidence. And I think there were almost even one step past that, where not only are these majorities secure, these wide majorities are, and you look at the individual districts in these legislative races, there aren't that many swing seats left. The swing seats are the 61st, 62nd, 63rd seat in the Iowa House. the 50 through 59, those are deep red now. I mean, those are rural seats that those folks aren't going to lose those races.
If you're Jennifer Converse, the House Minority Leader, and you're looking at that map, you're not seeing a path to a majority.
Right.
And the same in the Senate, right?
Right.
Brad Zahn's seat will be a hard hold for Republicans in the Senate. Urbandale, I think he reaches into a little bit of Waukee, I believe. That'll be a hard hold, right? But I mean, that's the kind of suburban district that in previous cycles would have just been written off by Republicans. And Brad has every chance in the world to keep that Senate seat. He's a hard worker.
Yeah.
He's known he's perfect for that district.
Yes.
Right? He knows everybody. Everybody knows him. So that's going to be a hard pickup for Senate Democrats to get 33, 17 breakdown in the Senate, right?
Right.
That is a formidable statement. Now it makes, I think as you would recognize, it makes governance fundamentally different. If your back's to the wall with 51 in a caucus, it's a lot different than if you have 61,
right,
or maybe 71.
A couple of thoughts on those Senate races. You're exactly right. Senator Zahn has a tough race. That is a seat that top of the ticket Democrats have done well in, but Brad is an incredibly hard campaigner, has been around and people know him. He's a former mayor of Urbandale and just knows a lot of people, and he's just an incredibly likable guy. He connects with people really well. And people have been telling Brad he might lose for 20 years, and I think at some point he can, has stopped believing them. He's just going to go out and win another election. And so I think I would never count Brad Zahn out. But yeah, it's going to be difficult. That'll be a battleground race. There's no question about it. But it's interesting. I want to get your thoughts on let me talk a little bit about what I think some of those other Senate battlegrounds are that aren't necessarily suburban seats. Is incumbent Senator Giddens in Cedar Falls, Hudson, LaPorte City. That's a swing seat that they have to defend, and that's really becomes kind of a 50-50. But then you go into places like Dubuque, so the seat that Pam Yoakum holds, that's on the radar. Those are more working class kinds of places that Republicans never were able to play in. And even on the east side of Des Moines with Nate Bolton's seat. I mean, they've got a good candidate there. Those are seats that aren't fortress blue anymore. Maybe some of the suburban seats are more difficult, but actually going back into those places where Donald Trump and the sort of a new populist Republican Party has made real inroads. But so I say all of that is that made easier with a Donald Trump on top of the ticket, or have we really seen an enduring realignment in politics of political affinities on that day? Or is that fool's gold for Republicans to go play in those kind of places like Dubuque and the east side of Des Moines? Give me your thoughts on some of that.
I think it is not fool's gold. I think those are competitive seats for Republicans to pick up. I've tried to follow a little bit that Senate District 20 on the east side of the metro and Altoona.
I think that's your district, is it not?
It is.
Okay.
And it is, the voter registration numbers have moved a little bit bluer than they were in the last cycle.
Okay.
It's slightly more Democratic than it was maybe a year and a half ago. But, it is a winnable district, particularly, with the right candidate. I think Nate Bolton could really have a difficult time getting reelected there. He's been in the Senate for quite a while. He's pretty well known in that district, but I think Senator Bolton does not have an easy path to reelection. He can't just walk through it. And the Senator Yoakum seat in Dubuque, I just find fascinating, especially since last year Senate Democrats rebelled against their leader, Zach Walz, and fired him because he got rid of 2 staffers, which is kind of weird, right?
Yeah.
For a minority leader to lose his position in leadership because he wanted his own team in place and didn't like the direction they were going, and his caucus rebelled again. I mean, that's not how that normally works, right? So, and then they turn around and they put Pam Yoakum up there who I don't know if she was planning to retire already. I suspect that was a decision that was in the works for a while. And the fact that she steps up to be minority leader in the Senate, knowing that her political career is about to end.
Yeah.
I mean, is anything as down in the dumps as Senate Democrats right now? It's just you can't beat something with nothing. And right now, what is their leadership structure? Who is going to carry them forward? I mean, one of the loudest voices in the Senate Democrats, Claire Celsey, has a primary challenge from a Democratic activist in her district. She's going to be running to save her seat.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know what will happen in that primary battle. I'm fascinated.
Oh, yeah, no, pass the popcorn. I'm ready.
I am so glad that the Polk County Auditor, Jamie Fitzgerald, who does a great job.
Yep, Jamie's
frankly,
great.
He gets those results out fast. And the first results I'm going to be looking for in the night of the primary is that Claire Celsey primary challenger to see how that shakes out.
Yeah. It's too early for predictions. I'm gonna resist the temptation to give you my hot take on that primary. I used to represent a fair amount of that area in a long ago when Republicans could win in those areas. But it's gonna be a lot of fun to watch. But that's the next step, I think, coming full circle on this political environment kind of thing. If we're truly in a Republican plus 17 kind of environment, and coming with that, it's not just the overall voter sentiment, but the enthusiasm, and does any national money at all come in on behalf of the Democrats to fund the operation, and there's some mechanics that have to go with that. The downside risk to them is, you know what, they can't beat Brad Zahn, and they're spending what little resources they have to try and defend places like, Altoona, Pleasant Hill with Nate Bolton on the east side, and Dubuque and other, and now those 34, 64 majorities get even bigger. There's some real risk on the back end of even just not being able to defend their own turf.
Right. And I think the days of national money coming in to help Iowa Democrats went away with the caucus. The number I would point to symbolize the problems that Iowa Democrats have right now is fewer than 12,000 Iowa Democrats returned a presidential preference card, which is their replacement, so to speak, for the Iowa caucuses, right?
Right.
I mean, I tweeted out #feel the energy, right? I mean, okay, Joe Biden is the incumbent, whatever, but I mean, come on, 12,000 people?
Well, their own voters understand, or at least a good chunk of their own voters. Joe Biden doesn't have it, and has lost the sort of
and just organizationally. What did they get out of the caucus? Did they get precinct volunteers?
No.
Did they get the body of people energized to turn things around for them? No.
Yeah. No, you can feel these things when you're active in politics and you're out and about and you're active and you talk. At your precinct caucus, there were people that were enthused. They were ready to go. They're mad. They want to beat Joe Biden, whether they were a Trump or DeSantis or they're in. And then you get out and there is enthusiasm among Republicans in Iowa to go out and win some elections this fall. And I just don't sense it. There's anger on issues on the left, but I don't know that there's that burning desire to go out and win a bunch of elections. It's just I don't feel it yet, and I think that comes from the top all the way down.
Right. The Republican brand right now is coalescing around fixing the border, dealing with inflation, kitchen table type issues. What's the brand of Democrats right now? It's gender ideology, abortion, and I mean, Jennifer Converse came out with like the House Democrats' big policy platform, and legalizing marijuana was like the third thing she said. Okay, fine. I understand we can have a robust debate about marijuana policy. That's awesome. Is that the thing you're going to run on? Is that the thing that you think is going to motivate independent voters to ignore what's going on at the border, to ignore what's going on every time they go to the grocery store, and it costs you more and more money to just put food on the table?
Yep.
All of those things, and then they're going to say, you know what, I can ignore all this if I'm really high, So I'm going to vote Democrats because I want a dispensary more than I want to be able to afford groceries.
Right.
I mean, give me a break.
I'm sure those are all data-driven decisions. There's a segment of probably more younger voters that may turn out to vote because of some of that, but I think it's a small number. Those are appealing to the base kinds of issues. We saw this in our ITR Foundation poll. Primary issues that people are worried about or concerned about when they're going to vote are immigration and the border was number one, and then kitchen table economic issues the other. That's what people are talking about. That's what they care about, and those are going to win the day. And Joe Biden and the Democrats do not have a message at all that's penetrating right now. And I think too, it's interesting. A little bit more on the congressionals. They've been running ads against Zach Nunn here in the 3rd District for months, trying to soften him up, see message testing, whatever it is, try and see what they can do to beat him, because that's still going to be the one that's probably competitive. I hear some rumblings about Marionette Miller Meeks, but 3rd District here in Central Iowa is always going to be competitive. They just keep trying to make inflation Zach Nunn's fault. They want to talk about inflation, which I think is telling that they understand that inflation and the economy are going to be the issue. But what's the message? Because I don't think anyone instinctively thinks that Zach Nunn has the cause of the rampant inflation that we've seen. Am I wrong on that, or do they blame Joe Biden?
I think it's hard to tag a individual member of Congress, a freshman member of Congress, with the state of our economy, right?
Right.
When Joe Biden was driving it off the cliff when Zach Nunn arrived in D.C., right? So that's all they have. That's not going to be very good.
No. I think it's the issue set is clear, and I think I give voters more credit, I think, than some people do. They instinctively understand, at least at a thematic level, what's going on. Inflation's been bad. The economy isn't where it needs to be. We have stagnated, and it is Joe Biden and all of these things they've tried to do to juice the economy, which haven't worked. If anything, they've been counterproductive. And I think Americans get that. I think Iowans get that. So that will shine through. Okay. Anything else politically going on that you're excited to watch? I mean, Claire Celsi primary, but...
I am excited for this cycle, and then the thing I'm excited for is the day after the election, when the 2026 cycle will start, and we can start talking about governor's race and all the statewide electeds and all those things. But that's for another day. Yeah,
it is, and there's an assumption in there that I don't know if it's still fair or not, but will there? Are we looking at a Kim Reynolds reelect or something else? And she hasn't made an announcement on that yet. And I'm on Team Kim Reynolds as long as she wants to be the governor, because I think she's been fantastic. So.
She doesn't need to decide that.
No.
For quite a while, and I share that view. She's had a remarkable string of successes and policy leadership, and I think we can talk polling numbers. Is her approval rating down a little bit? Yeah, because she's been fighting hard fights. Right. And when she gets out on the campaign trail, and she is a hard worker on the campaign trail, what she's worked to achieve will sell. Okay? The Des Moines Register doesn't like it. Yeah. That's fine. But when she takes those issues out on the campaign trail, Iowans will respond to it. And she's been underestimated almost as much as Brad Zahn has been.
Yeah. I could not agree more with that. Some of the erosion of her approval numbers is from very loyal Donald Trump Republicans that, she got involved with the DeSantis campaign. Okay, they're still going to vote for her. They just are frustrated because she wasn't with their candidate. Fine. I'm convinced that if Kim Reynolds was on the ballot this fall, she would still win by 20 points in this environment. I no doubt about it. She's a terrific campaigner. Her message, the issues are all right where they need to be with Iowans. Long may it continue.
Yes.
So, very good. But yeah, the 26th election is going to be a lot of fun. Regardless, I'm here for all of it. couple things that, and you know, we're going long today, but that's okay because you're here and you don't act like you got any place else to be. So let's keep going. So we talked the last time you were here about gender balance on boards and commissions, specifically the State Judicial Nominating Commission, kind of as we pivot to Iowa issues. Briefly talk about what happened with the legislation this year, because it morphed into something more. But and then what you see the role of Kirkwood in helping to lead to some of those reforms. Yeah, I think you know where I'm going with that.
I do. I can take it from there. So just to give the listeners some context, Kirkwood, along with our friends at the Pacific Legal Foundation, which is a national public interest right of center group, we filed a lawsuit challenging this boards and commissions rule that we've had in Iowa law for about 30 years now that required gender balance on all boards and commissions at the state level, and that required it with an escape valve, if you will, at the local level. And for whatever the justification for that when it was enacted, the time that was needed has long passed. And what you have is just blatant discrimination baked into our statute. And so individual freedom and protecting the Constitution is the core of what Kirkwood does. And in looking at ways to challenge this, I came up with the idea of let's challenge it in the context of the State Judicial Nominating Commission. And again, to make this not too wonky, but just to explain to your listeners, you have to have somebody to be the plaintiff. I just, as the Kirkwood Institute, can't just go in and sue because I think some law is unconstitutional. I have to find a plaintiff who's actually been harmed by the law.
The legal principle known as standing.
Yes.
You have standing to
right.
file an action.
I have been aggrieved as a plaintiff in a way that's different than the population in general. Therefore, I can go to court and sue to get redress for this violation. That's standing. So for most boards and commissions, it's very hard to find somebody who has standing, because how can you say, oh, this person would have been appointed to a spot on the Board of Regents, for example, if not for being the wrong gender for the seat that was up. It's just completely speculative, and so it's almost impossible to find somebody who has standing for most boards and commissions. But for the State Judicial Nominating Commission members who are elected by Iowa lawyers, that's an election. You just file to be a candidate.
Yeah.
And so there's a seat that's up for a woman, and you find a man who wants to run and can challenge it, or vice versa. So it was a very convenient vehicle to challenge the constitutionality of this. So we filed that lawsuit, went forward, and through all the litigation, were granted a permanent injunction by the federal court back in January that said, yes, this does not survive a legal standard called intermediate scrutiny, that the government does not have a sufficient interest to justify blatantly discriminating against people on the basis of their gender. And so the court ordered the state court administrator that he could no longer enforce that gender quota law in running the elections for those members of the State Judicial Nominating Commission. Now, the timing of it could not have been better, because Senator Schultz has had a bill now for 2 cycles trying to repeal the gender quota law. And I think it just gave that bill a lot of tailwind.
In
exactly the right moment.
The bill that Senator Schultz has is not limited to the State Judicial Nominating Commission. That is more of all boards and commissions.
Yes, and it really is something that needed to happen, because it has really significant effects. I mean, I think most Iowans intuitively understand we want the best person to be appointed for the position regardless. We could have boards and commissions that are all women. That would be fine. This is not about women not having opportunities. In a lot of these situations, it denies women opportunities because of the various boards that are involved. There's some occupational licensing boards, which is a separate problem. We should be getting rid of occupational licensing. But you have occupational licensing in fields where there are just in the marketplace. I mean, if you go to the cosmetology board,
being
that's a great example, right? The cosmetology board has to be half men. Well, you're regulating a profession that's probably 98% women. Mm-hmm. It doesn't make any sense. The same thing with like the the boiler and pressure vessels
Yeah.
board, right?
Right.
I mean, honestly, there's not a lot of women up there
Yep.
with a 50-pound pipe on their shoulder climbing up a ladder to bolt it into place, okay? That's just the nature of it.
Right.
And so it doesn't make any sense. And at the local level, frankly, the feedback from people who were being honest was there's a lot more women right now who are engaged at the local level and want to serve on your various little committees and commissions that cities and counties have. And half those spots have to go to men. Well, first of all, men, step up and volunteer for those boards and commissions. But right now you have lots of women being denied opportunities to kind of get into public life at the local level. And maybe you're on the park board and that's going to turn into running for city council, and you could be running for the state legislature someday, but you're denied that first step into the process because of this antiquated law. So that has passed the legislature. It's waiting the governor's signature, which we fully expect. And I'm very proud of it because it's an example of we used litigation to, first of all, get an injunction against an unconstitutional law, which that by itself is good. But it also gave, to be real candid, I think it gave Senator Schultz the political tailwind he needed at the right moment to get that bill over the line and get it passed. And so it's something I'm very proud of that Kirkwood was able to do.
Yeah, at the Capitol, there's hundreds of bills every year, and doing any number of things. And when you talk about that legitimacy, well, this is a real problem because we have a judge now that's indicated that something's not working right. And so I think that's exactly right. And it's the value of Kirkwood and PLF, Pacific Legal Foundation, a great organization we're working with on a number of things here. So I think that's great, which is also the other segue is the judicial deference, the bill in Iowa. And we've touched on this briefly, but I don't think we've given it sort of the time it deserves here on the podcast. But, nationally you hear, maybe if you follow the court, you hear about Chevron doctrine, and that's up before the U.S. Supreme Court right now, presumably get a ruling on that very soon. A bill that does a slightly different thing in Iowa, but talk about the idea of agency deference when it comes to rulemaking.
Sure. What this is really important at the national level is asking the Supreme Court to overturn a case called Chevron versus EPA, where that case, it's from the 1980s, the court said we are going to defer to an agency's interpretation of its statute. So if the agency interprets the statute as giving it authority to enact a certain kind of regulation, that will show deference to what the agency said the law meant. When ordinarily judges, ultimately when deciding a lawsuit, are the ones who are supposed to say what the law is that applies to that dispute, and not defer to one of the parties.
Right.
Okay. In an ordinary lawsuit, if I sue my neighbor over, his fence is in the wrong place, and I interpret what the statute says about fences in one way, the court's not going to say, well, you're the defendant in this lawsuit over having a fence challenge, and we're going to defer to you, defendant, as to what you think the law means, and not independently decide as judges what it means. Okay, we don't do that in any other context, but the court had created this doctrine called Chevron deference based on the name of the case. Mm-hmm. Now, at the state level, we have administrative law agencies at the state level who are enacting regulations, and what the legislature has done, which is something a little bit different, rather than what the U.S. Supreme Court did is just abdicate its role to agencies. The legislature abdicated that role by directing the court in cases where the legislature has given the agency authority to interpret its own regulations, that the court has to show deference to the agency's interpretation of the statute. And so what the bill is in the Iowa legislature is to change that and to get away from having courts defer to agencies and just simply decide what the statute means on its own independently. And it's an important way to restore the separation of powers and the balance between judicial, executive, and legislative authority. It's different than how it plays out in Chevron deference, but the end result should be the same.
Without it, we have a system where government, its agencies, have an upper hand over the individual or whatever litigant in that case, right? I mean, so it's just to bring fairness to the system that, well, why should we take their word for it? If I want to challenge the application of one of these rules, right? I mean, maybe I'm oversimplifying it a little bit, but it empowers the system as it is constructed, empowers the people that create the rules and create the regulations.
Yes, and it gives the ability to a regulated entity to question, to go one step back in challenging what's going on. It's not just, did I violate this regulation, yes or no, but did the legislature actually authorize you to write this regulation in this way?
Yeah.
Now, it's really important at the federal level because Congress, for decades, has abdicated its responsibility and tells the EPA almost literally make the air clean.
Yeah.
And then EPA decides what chemicals you can and can't emit in order to make the air clean or not. And making decisions that have billions of dollars worth of impact on the economy.
Product safety being another one that
Right.
comes into play a lot on that.
At the state level, it's, we're not talking rules that have hundreds of billions of dollars of impact on the national economy. But still, if the agency's right, it should have no problem saying, okay, the legislature told us to do A, B, and C, and we wrote a rule built around that so that we could apply what the legislature said faithfully. As long as you've done that, that's fine. And this is not going to be, the sky is falling, we're still going to have clean water, we're still going to have clean air. It's just simply the agency doesn't get a free pass on its interpretation of the statute. It has to show the court that its interpretation of the law is correct, just like any other person or entity that went to court would have to do.
Good. We are way over our usual time, but I still want to get your perspective, Alan, on the ballot access issue with, there was a Supreme Court ruling on the President Trump getting booted off the ballot in Colorado. The legislature here in Iowa has taken action to make sure that rogue courts can't do those kinds of things here. Tell us what we need to know about what that means.
Sure. Fortunately, the Supreme Court took the country back from potentially the brink of what could have been.
I don't think that's an exaggeration at all. What could have happened if you get a system, but
right. So after the Civil War, 14th Amendment, a very important amendment for rebalancing power between the federal government and states, and has a part of it, Section 3, that is designed to prevent oath-breaking insurrectionists from holding government office at the state or federal level. Because obviously it was a real problem where during Reconstruction and southern states were re-electing people who had been, 2 years ago they'd been a general leading troops against the Union Army, and now they're sitting in Congress, right? And there was a real sense that that's not the path forward. And so the Congress proposed an amendment that the states ratified that had a clause in it that said that if you had previously taken an oath to uphold the Constitution, that you could not hold certain categories of offices at the federal or state level. And then the Congress enacted some legislation to enforce that, which later became kind of moot because the Congress granted amnesty about 10 years as part of, we'll get super wonky. We do need to bring John in here to talk about the election of 1876.
Oh, he has detailed files. He has things to say.
And the deal to end Reconstruction in order to give that election to the Republicans, one of the most disastrous compromises in the history of the Republic. So the question there are lots of questions. Is what happened on January 6, 2021 an insurrection? If it was, did Donald Trump engage in it? Did he aid and abet in it through his actions or his omissions? Did he take the kind of oath that subjects you to that amendment? Is the president one of the officers that's excluded by the amendment? There's lots of complicated questions. There was a lawsuit filed in Colorado with a really aggressive interpretation of Colorado law that resulted in a trial court judge saying he did engage in what was an insurrection, checked off all the boxes except the president is not an officer of the United States, therefore this amendment doesn't apply to him. That goes up on appeal. Colorado Supreme Court says 4-3, that's wrong. He did engage in an insurrection, but this amendment does apply to the presidency, therefore he can't be on the ballot. That goes up on appeal to the U.S. Supreme Court, and they ruled on the bottom line question 9-0. The bottom line question is, does Section 3 of the 14th Amendment act without any kind of federal statute to give you the structure of how do you decide if this was an insurrection, this person did take the right kind of oath, they are subject to it, all of those things. And because the legislation that Congress had enacted right after the Civil War had been repealed, there's no federal statutory hook to determine that he's ineligible to be on the ballot and to give the state the authority to kick him off. And the states don't independently have the authority to do that. I think it would have been disastrous for our political system. Whatever you think about Donald Trump, you could think Donald Trump is the worst person in the world. But the idea that through this process we're going to say you can or cannot be eligible to be on the ballot, let's be real, a lot of red states would have turned right around and kicked Joe Biden off the ballot. It would have been a very ugly process. And if you tell the American people, and look, there's some lingering things out there as to whether Congress independently can enforce Section 3 when it counts the electoral votes, January 6, 2025. And I want to tell you, if you want stability in the political system after this, do not give congressional Democrats a majority in both the House and the Senate for the next Congress that will take office on January 3rd, 2025. Because the reality is, if the Democrats have a majority in the House and Senate on January 3rd, 2025, they could use that majority 3 days later when they count electoral votes to say Donald Trump's an insurrectionist, these electoral votes are not regularly given, and try to throw the election to Joe Biden, which would be a catastrophic moment in American history. I don't know how we come back from that.
It would be a fascinating, maybe in a future episode, I would like to get your perspective on what some of these pitfalls are looking beyond January 3rd, January 6th, 2025. Because I think that's absolutely right, is what's the next step from either political party as a result? Is it, you mentioned red states, if this had been allowed to stand, red states respond a certain way. It's not hard for me to imagine, regardless of who wins this presidential election, that a response from the other side that we haven't seen in American history, certainly since the Civil War, that as the divide between blue and red America grows bigger and bigger every year, it's going to get harder and harder to hold the republic together, to have a common politics. And that's something that we all ought to have an eye on.
Well, I think so. And I would go back to the reaction after Donald Trump's victory in 2016 and for all the talk of insurrection in 2021, the people who were openly out there trying to recruit electors to show up in their state capitals in December of 2016 and not vote for Donald Trump, right?
Yeah.
Seemed a little insurrection-y to me, to prevent the lawful transition of power, and then immediately launching a completely bogus impeachment inquiry. Yes. It is not an overstatement to say that nationally, Democrats refused to acknowledge that
Yes.
Donald Trump was the legitimately elected president of the United States in early 2017, and everything that's happened after that has flowed from
Yes.
that refusal to accept the peaceful transition of power.
Yep. No, I think that's right.
That
Again-
doesn't validate everything that happened after it, right?
No, not
in
at all.
response.
And we're not-
And I'm not saying everything that happened was right or wrong. I'm just saying that is the inflection point.
Right. And there were things, varying degrees of propriety in what the left did in terms of their role as the minority after that election. But there certainly were things that, look, you're the minority party. You should be working to win the next election, probably from the moment you lost the one to begin with. And so they had to go after President Trump. I get it, right? But some of those things were straight up misuses of authority, taking lawfare to the next level. And some of it was just straight up fabrications. And those are the things that we need to be able to, regardless of who's in power, we need to be able to call those things out. So, because they're not helpful. So, anyway, but I have many other thoughts, but I'm going to save them for another day because,
Well, I'll come back.
yeah, I look forward to that. So I'm out of issues, but we're also way out of time. And you've probably got somebody you can bill for this time because you're giving it to us for free today.
Attention to file 1.2 hours.
Yes. Okay, good. All right. Alan, thank you very much. And it's always a pleasure. We're very thankful to have you. And so with that having been said, don't forget to like this episode, subscribe on your favorite audio platform, especially on YouTube. We're over there and you can see our smiling faces. And with all of that, I will look forward to seeing you all next time. And Alan looks forward to seeing you whenever that next time is. But we hope it's very soon. So,
Thanks, Chris.
all righty. And with all of that having been said, have a great weekend. We'll see you next time on ITR Live.